Hi guys, my name is Madeline Montoya and I'm the creative director of Byline, which is a young New York City-based web and print publication. So a little bit about me. I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a BFA in communication design in 2019. And that's kind of where my love for editorial started. And so I wanted to be a part of it, whether it was digital, print, in like any form. So after graduating, I was a designer at Man Repeller, which is no longer around, but it was a small digital fashion publication. Then was at Domino Magazine, which is a print and web publication about home design. And that's when I decided to try to go for the editorial print and design fellowship at the New York Times, and got it and was there for a year, and then spent a little time after as a contract art director. And that leads me to where I am now, which is at Bloomberg Businessweek as an art director on their print and web stories, as well as Byline, which is sort of my 5 to 9 after Businessweek, since Businessweek's like my full-time job, and then Byline is a side project that I'm creative director of. And I made this little graphic because I like all the arrows showing freelance, because I do think that's kind of like a lot of things that the graphic designers do and art directors do and illustrators do is, you know, you have your full-time jobs, but you also like have a robust freelance practice and you want to kind of get your hands on any creative endeavor you can, which is kind of how Byline started for me. So first I'll give some background on what Byline is and why we exist. We launched last June with the goal of becoming a space where people could write about literally whatever they wanted. I included 2 screenshots from Reddit on r/freelance writing, both from the last year, showing people's response to some sort of shift that happened in the editorial world, especially with freelance writing. The founders of Byline noticed the shift as writers themselves and wanted to create an editorial platform where writers could actually talk about what interested them, and you didn't need to be a prolific editorial name to be able to get a Byline. And that's where the name came from. We basically just wanted to give anyone with a cool idea or interesting thought a byline. We do have themes that dictate the content somewhat, but I hope that the site kind of ends up feeling like a mirror reflecting back at those visiting, like you're a real part of what we're generating there. Some of the pieces that people have written that I wanted to highlight is a piece on why they love the show Survivor, what to do when people make really good music but are maybe questionable in the morals department. And one of my favorite columnists is a 12-year-old, and he wrote about what he wants to be when he grows up. We also make an effort to highlight people that we feel like are having a really exciting career and people that we want to raise awareness about. We have a column called On the Rise for that. So here's an example that we wrote about 5 emerging designers that we think you should know. Pieces on writers whose work we love a lot. And then also we do more traditional cover stars like the podcaster Tinks. And then some more unconventional cover stars, like when we launched, we decided that our cover stars would be the actual people that are full-time editors at Wikipedia. And then we also do some more unconventional features, like our buddy system theme. We decided every single cover star would be 2 people that are doing something together, whether it's business partners, brothers, a relationship. So Lycan is a furniture store deep in Brooklyn, and it's 2 friends that met on Craigslist. And then this ice cream shop in New York City, which is started by a married couple. Since Byline has started, it's become like so much bigger than I could have anticipated, and I wanted to include this slide because it shows sort of where we've been. So, you know, we started off with just a website, and then it turned into, we ended up decided to start doing print publications, which is what you see on the bottom right. We have merch now, and then we even do small zines and collaborations with brands. So where you see Hacking It, that was a collaboration with Urban Outfitters and Dickies, and then the little magazine you see at the top is a zine that just launched this past week in collaboration with Quit with Jones, which is a company that's helping people quit vaping. I wanted to include, this is from Byline's initial deck that the 2 founders sent me, and I wanted to show it because it's pretty broad, and I think one of the bigger challenges of Byline was working on creating a brand system and website for a brand that didn't exist yet. And what I mean by that is one of the corners of the Byline brand is our content and our writers, and we didn't have that going in. Like, we had no idea who was going to want to write for us. We had no idea what people were going to want to write about. And brands expand all the time and update systems as they age, but I feel like when a brand starts, they usually have like their core audience and their core values set, whether it's a product or service that is the center of the brand, and we really didn't have that. And because this lack of foresight into what the brand would evolve into, I eventually realized the website design would need to be pretty pared down. It was still important to be playful since it was like this like new, exciting young thing that we wanted to bring into the world, but I didn't want to be too strong in suggesting a visual language. And I like this slide in the initial deck they sent me because it has some elements that ended up being pretty central to the branding, like the gray being our primary color that we used and the nods to a traditional newspaper. When I was looking for inspiration, I wanted to kind of do like I guess timeline's the wrong word, but like a meter of like what I think we should kind of fall into. So I think on one side, I put the New York Times Magazine homepage because to me, it's very pared down, it's very organized. In the middle, I put it's actually from Canada, the website Essence, which is a clothing website, but they also have an editorial platform. And to me, it's still pared down, but it has some more like exciting, strong typographic moves that the New York Times Magazine doesn't have. And then Fisk Project, which is the design studio, is very colorful, very playful. And where I put that vertical line is where I think Byline should fall. I think, we should be a little bit more playful than the New York Times, for example, but I do think that Fisk Projects is so expressive and they have such a strong brand language. And I think that Byline, should come out maybe being a little more pared down than that. I wanted to include some more inspiration that was not necessarily from websites. And Le Puzz is a puzzle brand, but I think their website was so organized, and I really fell in love with this like vertical line structure they have, as well as the thing below it, which is called Silo. I'm honestly not sure what it is. I think it's like a French artist collective, but this was a huge source of inspiration for me. It's so intensely boxed in with all these vertical and horizontal lines, and I felt that it felt so organized, and it almost felt like a nod to newspapers, which leads me to the Drunken Canal and the New York Times. So even though the New York Times is so pared down, it was a huge source of inspiration for me with how they organized content. And the Drunken Canal is actually what sort of put Byline on the map, because one of the founders of Byline started this magazine in Lower Manhattan called The Drunken Canal. And I wanted to include the pages when I was thinking about the visual language of Byline because it is a newspaper and it is a huge part of Byline's history, but I loved how it really injected playfulness into its paper. This was round one, so of like my designs for the website. As you can see, it's kind of not pared down at all. Like I think my style is starting off with like a really, really aggressive like color and typographic language. And I think, it's easier for me personally to start really loud and then kind of take a step back. But I wanted to show this because I think it's it's really out there. And I think there was like lots of like motifs that I was excited into incorporating that we ended up kind of putting away and not really using. For example, the pencil. My idea was that it would be a pencil, and as you would scroll down on the website, it would get smaller and smaller, like you were sharpening it, and then it would be like gone by the end. And I think that's a great idea, but I think, coming out hot with like a visual like that might have not been the move. This is round two, so as you can see, color is removed. We still have some like really stretched big type, but we're kind of starting to get more of a structure here that feels a little less aggressive. And then these were my initial story mocks, which feel pretty similar to how the website ended up being. So as you can see, we have like a line structure coming in. We have like a lot more organized type. It doesn't feel as loud. We're still playing with color. We're still playing with big images. And one of the bigger things that I worked with a developer on was sort of injecting these like small playful moments that didn't feel super loud, but still were exciting. And that was the rotating type. So on the website, every time you refresh it, the type takes a different angle, the headline. So sometimes it's straight, sometimes it's 5 degrees, sometimes it's negative 30 degrees. It's supposed to be different every time you go to the webpage. And then kind of on that note, I still wanted Byline to feel fun. I didn't want it to feel like this really quiet thing launching. So I sort of played with this idea I called injecting the fun, and that was getting some more interesting color combos, which we ended up deciding to do a color wheel. So you would press it, and you can still press it, and there's new colors that launch with every single theme, which are different color combinations. So it kind of feels like you can pick what kind of byline you want to read. And then I included some sketches on the bottom row there that we ended up not going with, but I just wanted to show that I was playing with, how to kind of toe the line between organized but fun. And these are kind of the 3 iterations. So you can see, the first one is the one I showed you. The second one was like round, like 2.5, I think. So there's still some like typographic fun stuff going on there. And then the third one is what our website looks like currently. As you can see, it's a different typeface. We've recently started experimenting with getting a special typeface for each issue and then putting that on the site. And that's what it looks like right now. So what I'll be talking about for the rest of the time is Byline's 3 print magazines we've had so far and how they are applied on the web. I was thinking about only discussing one of them, but I think the most fun part of a new magazine or independent print is there is a real lack of foresight, and you find yourself building something without knowing what the final outcome is supposed to look like or what the brand is going to evolve into. At Bloomberg Businessweek, we have special issues, and it's where the entire magazine, or at least half of it, is taken over by a theme like heists or the idea of longevity. And those issues are always the most fun to work on because it's a chance to not only stretch your design and type muscles, but you reinvent the wheel on how the magazine looks. You're basically developing a totally new visual system. That's kind of how Byline is operating right now when it comes to print. And this can definitely be stressful because I feel like the pressure to either commit to a visual look, or if I decide to make each issue special, there's an expectation in my head that each issue should upstage the last one and feel even more special and feel even more different. But a calming thought for me is that any magazine design should embody where the brand is at editorially. And Byline is not even 2 years old, and we don't know who we are or what we're going to become yet. And I like that our magazine design reflects that. So Hacking It was our first print issue, and it was our first large themed issue, partly because we were doing more cover stars than we ever had been. I think it was 5. And we were establishing a visual identity for the theme, and it was our first print issue. The name and idea behind the theme was examining how our work world had changed and putting the attention on creatives who had essentially hacked their working situation, whether that was learning how to be a full-time freelancer, finally investing in themselves and pursuing a passion, or simply having a practice that we're really interested in. The first thing that came to mind when thinking about trying to hack your work situation was workbook imagery, so like dash lines, arrows, notes written all over it, folders, etc. I also kept thinking about patches, partly because I associate ephemera like stickers and patches, something a creative might keep in their studio for reference. But I also, because one of our brand partners for this issue was Dickies, the workwear brand. The other one was Urban Outfitters. I knew I wanted to pick a special typeface for this identity, and I wanted a typeface that had a cutout feel, but also be bold and have some unique shape to it. And that's how I landed on that great typeface, Maxi by Dynamo, which is what you see with Hacking It right there. This is one of the earlier web sketches I did for the homepage. The top logo is pretty final and is pretty similar to what the final logo ended up being. But I just wanted to show how the dashed lines came in on the website and how I originally loved the idea of putting tags and patches all over the website. We ended up ditching this idea because it was too hard to figure out a system that would consistently work and not cover words up, because my idea was you would refresh it and different patches would appear, but it ended up covering up headlines and stuff. But it did help inspire what came for print, and I liked the idea of Hacking It appearing in different lockups, similar to different ways of working. So I ended up having multiple lockups of the logo that I had turned into a GIF that would move on the top of the site. So you would still get some kind of changing in motion and evolving happening with the logo morphing, but I kind of ditched the patches and stuff so it wouldn't cover up anything on the site. This is a sketch of what the feature/cover star web pages would look like. On the left are 2 spreads from the magazine Gossamer, which I've done some work for, but I'm also just a huge fan of their design system in the print magazine. And I love how they structure these conversation pages with the name of who they spoke with large type. There's no headline or anything. It's just the person, and then it jumps right into the conversation. And so I think I love the idea of highlighting the subject of the names in a similar way. So I created these lockups with the cover star's name, mimicking the same movement as the logo. So we originally had a problem with the same thing, with these big names would cover up some of the headline or the deck and some of the type going on the page. But we solved it by having users being able to click and move the names around the page. And we ended up loving that solve because it went along with the workbook idea of being able to customize the web page and kind of mess with the furniture of it. And this actually inspired us to add some similar features. We ended up adding a pencil and an eraser, so you could draw on the web page and then erase it. So it kind of felt like your own personal workbook. For Hacking It's print, I knew I wanted to bring in the dash lines, that philosophy of the larger names, and the overall workbook feel. Where in web, you could have cool features of being able to move things around on the page and draw. Print is obviously static. So for the print version, I wanted it to still feel like this customizable thing where you can move things around. So I decided to kind of bring back that idea of patches and stickers that I had for the web version, but instead of using random patches or clothing tags, I used items from the actual images we photographed for this issue. The TOC is the biggest example of this. I looked at all the imagery we had and saw what we could pull to be its own standing thing. Some of them are more random, like something on somebody's desk or somebody's shoe, and some are the actual cover stars themselves, as you can see like moving around on the page. I think the cutout imagery added to the feeling of someone saving clippings or stickers like you would do if you were keeping a journal or a workbook of things that inspired you. I liked that the top of the TOC felt organized and the bottom was this more chaotic layout, and the type on the bottom followed suit by interacting with the images. I think this TOC really kind of set up what you were going to see in the rest of the book. This is an example of one of the features, this one on singer James Ivey. As you can see, I brought in the same cutouts, one of which was also used in the TOC. I loved the idea of someone maybe recognizing the cutout from the TOC and then seeing it on this page and realizing that they had seen it before. Here's another cutout example, this one being the actual feature subject, which is him kicking the deck in the corner there. This interaction of him looking like he's kicking the lines of the deck or the lines are protruding off of his foot, like Ray's, is one of my favorite type and image interactions in the book. It might feel like all the headlines and decks are treated really differently and move in really different ways, and I liked that feeling for a book whose visual theme is all about having a workbook or sketchbook. To me, certain design moves could appear once or twice, and that was fine, almost like I was experimenting in real time. I know I mentioned this idea of the names of who we spoke to being really large, and I wanted to bring that into the book. I handled it in two different ways. For spreads where the image only took up one page, I did this double name treatment. I played with this for a while, and to this day, I'm not sure if my reasoning is totally clear, but from the beginning, I loved the name being on the image itself, but something was holding me back from just having the name on one side and then having the headline continue on the other page. I was worried that you would kind of not be able to understand that like this was the start of the headline and then it was continuing on the next page. It just felt disconnected to me. I thought a lot about why I liked the type sitting wonky on the image itself, and to me it felt like someone had almost cut out the name of the person and were kind of playing around with it on the image like they were doing a collage of their own. And this gave me the idea to maybe reappear that same exact lockup of the name, but with dotted lines, so it looks like there's a cutout there for people to cut the letters out and then place them on the other sides like they're playing around too. I was even gonna add like a scissor icon on all those names, but I thought that was maybe a little heavy-handed. I don't know if it works without the scissor lines, honestly, but I do like how it looks, so I guess, you know, form over function on that one. The three features that were full bleed, I thought the treatment would be too confusing to have like the dotted lines and then the name appear again. So instead I just did one big line lockup, but I did try to have the type interact with the subject more on these ones. So you can see the type interacting with Kareem's head and hands, Lumia's leg and shoulder, and radiating out of Adam's head. To help me with the design system of the book, I separated the different stories into three categories. Features is the biggest one, which we just saw. And the next category were pieces that deserve some gravitas on the page because they focus on a subject, but they just weren't a cover star. To me, that meant they were still important, but they just wouldn't get the same length or type treatment as the features did. Similar to the full bleed spreads, it wouldn't make any sense anyway to do the double name treatment with one and the dotted line stroke. So I decided I still wanted to highlight their name, and so I made the whole headline in the Maxi typeface, which is the branded font for Hacking It, and it would still be expressive and interact with the image when possible. Here's one example of this format with a piece written by style aficionado Chris Black, a profile on the cut writer Adanya Isawi. The type is interacting a lot with her, I think, on this one, especially with her name being like outlining the top of her head, which I love. And then the writer Annie Hamilton speaking about failure. As you can see, there's dotted lines running throughout the piece. The type feels fun and chaotic in a way that feels like a workbook to me. But with just these elements, I was feeling like it wasn't pushing the idea of a creative workbook enough. So I ended up showing the layouts to a colleague of mine at Bloomberg Businessweek named Saxon Randolph, and he suggested I try to literally illustrate the look of folders and magazine spines and hold paper on the spreads. And this actually reminded me of two websites that I had seen that took a similar approach to the idea of emulating physical objects to signify an idea. This example comes from Imaginary's Frontier, an art collective. These different elements sort of look like internet tabs, but to me they look much more like folders in a filing cabinet. The next reference is Bookland, where people are invited to collaboratively write a story based on the last few paragraphs written. This website itself displays each book story as a book spine, and when you click into the spine, it expands where you can see the name the same way that you would see and like you would experience sliding a book off of a shelf in a library. And these references always stuck with me. And although I think they have an added success because of their ability to be interactive through the web, Saxton's suggestion made me think of them because it was using the same technique, emulating the physical environment we associate with different actions and ideas, like going through a filing cabinet or sliding a book off the shelf, but turning them into some sort of like design motif. So I did the same thing. Sometimes it was a mixture of book spines and whole paper. Sometimes it was a folder. Sometimes they had no color. Sometimes they had a lot of color. It also became a perfect place for the deck and bylines. The last thing I wanted to show from this print issue was the third category I gave to the pieces in the book, and those are FOB or front of book. They weren't actually all at the front of the book, but I called it that because they're like the most pared down, quieter treatment. The treatment of the folders / book spines came in handy for these pages as well, and I decided to put the headlines for these stories there. It's a nice idea that I think these vertical headlines could be sort of a similar experience as leafing through folders if you were flipping through a book. Next is Music to My Ears, which is our 6th issue. For the web part of Music to Our Ears, I focused on picking a design element that only you could do digitally. We loved the idea of creating some sort of motion that emulated sound waves reverberating and combined that with the idea of those old music visualizers you used to see on like Windows or iTunes. The result was creating custom color combinations for each feature star like we always do for the site, but this time it was a circular gradient pattern and it would slowly radiate out. Some of the combinations were much less noticeable and quieter than others, like this one you can barely see. But I didn't really mind that because to me that captured different kinds of music and sound, and not all sound is like a loud rock song, maybe it's a really quiet humming. There was also a technical reason for these combos being quieter, and that was because people actually have to be able to read text on top of it, which is a recurring problem I think we have. We have a little color changing button on our homepage that allows you to pick which color combination you want to explore with, and we would release a new gradient whenever a new feature would come out, and that always felt fun to me, and it was a cool way to signify that there was something new on the site even before you saw the new story. For this print issue, I used the same 3 categories that I used for hacking it, aka the front of book, smaller subject highlights, but still kind of a big moment, and then features. Starting with the FOB, I decided to try something different and have these stories snake, aka flow through the pages, versus combining each one to a certain number of pages on the spread. This was mostly because the last issue, the length varied so much between stories that it ended up being a huge lift to solve the puzzle of making sure that everything had a page on its own. And I thought it would be easier to kind of hack the puzzle of having things snake through. Overall, the big inspiration for this was sheet music. The stark black and white pages with notes was often how I interpreted music when I was younger. I'm from the South in the US, so I used to have to go to church during school and stuff, and I associated music early on with like choir books and singing hymns. And I found the sheet music for the song Daydreaming by Radiohead, which I think is a great example of how sheet music informed my tight treatment this issue. The way notes cascade up and down, stack on top of each other, and are spaced apart to capture a melody felt like one of the essences of music, and I decided to treat type the same way. I made these moves to the whole book, ranging from the black and white FOB pages to the features. I also varied their intensity. Sometimes it was just one letter or one word that would take on the movement. Beyond the small quirks I threw in, like filling a page with a piece of illustration, I kept the FOB pretty simple. The midway features feel pretty similar to what I did for the previous issue. We still have big names and titles, and there's movement in these letters, albeit this time with the philosophy of music versus collage cutouts. I also got a little bit more experimental with color this issue, since the type was a way to express melodies. I thought, what else do I love in particular about music? And one of my favorite artists is James Blake, and I think what's so euphoric about his music is how he layers sound. You can really hear the labor of all these different sounds coming together to create a new auditory experience. My version of interpreting that was putting 2 different colors together, sometimes complementary, sometimes more unconventional, to create a new product together on the page. In the same way I think some of the gradients on the website were quieter, not all the spreads have 2 colors other than white. I like to think of that as another way to express diversity in sound. I think the features also feel similar to Hacking It. Unlike Hacking It having a new treatment of the dash line type, there isn't anything new brought in with the features that the midway features don't have. It just kind of feels like I amped it up for these moments with the existing color and type treatment by giving it more space. There's essentially not any interaction with the type in the image like I had with Hacking It either. Instead, I tried to create really beautiful typographic compositions using the melody philosophy. I also got this inverse treatment, as you can see, since I did it on 3 out of the 5 features, where the color flips. The last 2 features were this artist Samia and Julia in Casablancas and the Voids, and they both kind of break the form of the other features. Samia is the only feature that almost goes full bleed with an image, while Julian is the only feature where type fully moves across the spread. I think both bring a good example of breaking the system when the art calls for it. This Samia image is actually a vertical image, but when I played with it on the page as such, she just felt small, and the headline was so powerful for this piece, and she wrote it herself, and I just loved this image of her, and I wanted her face and her hair glistening in the sun to be as large as possible. It carried more weight to me in that way, so I decided to make it much larger. And then for Julian's spread, this was kind of a technical problem. We only commissioned 1 cover image for his piece from the illustrator, Natalie Shields. So we were kind of like panicking on what we could do for art on the inside. And I got the idea to ask her for a Photoshop file so I could break it apart and create a new artwork with the illustrations we already had. So type kind of had to take on a larger role to fill the page, so the illustrations could feel like they were filling the page enough, which was another break of form. I did not write anything for this because I literally shipped this magazine this morning, but this is a sneak peek of our next issue that you can pre-order called Beauty. For this one, we did 2 covers. One of them was the singer Clairo, and for the second one, we wanted to try something different. Instead of having another cover star in a more conventional way, we wanted to hire a photographer to do a photo essay on what they thought beauty was. So we hired a photographer, Adam Friedlander, who shot various still lives and portraits, and we fell in love with this blurred eye. I'm not sure why. I think it just felt, the motion of it, I think, and like the personableness of it just felt like a beautiful moment. It felt like I'm capturing a memory, which is why we ended up going with it for the cover. My philosophy for the beauty issue was, I think when you first think of beauty, you think of like elegant typefaces, you think of scripts, you think of like a real, like quite literal version of beauty. But I still wanted to inject some of that like jumping type fun, so I ended up getting this typeface Romy and playing a lot with like these like really ornate alternate characters that they had, like the I and the U and the D, but still having the type jump around. And on the other hand, I think beauty is not always something that's like a beautiful script. I think it can come in all shapes and sizes, and it shifts and it forms, it distorts, and I wanted to capture that as well. So I also got this like thicker, more powerful typeface and wanted to shift the letters so it could feel like, you know, there's all kinds of beauty encapsulated in this issue. These are illustrations. This was also the first time that we gave more narrative pieces a bigger moment. In the past 2 issues, we only would give like cover stars and larger like highlighting features a big full spread moment, but since this issue was different than others in that it was mostly thought pieces about beauty, we kind of wanted to change the structure and give some narrative pieces a bigger moment. We also are trying to expand into doing more photo essays on our own. So this was a photo essay that I worked with Ryan Duffin, who is a photographer, but also works as a photo editor at Bloomberg Businessweek. And we shot boys wearing makeup. These are the FOB pages. As you can see, they're like a little bit more simple, but still have some fun typography going on. Clairo's cover page. And the opener for Adam's piece on beauty, his photo essay. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before questions is, I do think it's a kind of an interesting thing with Byline. Obviously, we're an indie magazine, and making money is something that is necessary, even though it's not like our primary goal. But ads aren't really the same thing as they used to be when it comes to editorial. And even though we do sell some ads for the print magazine, it's really minimal. We don't run ads on our site. So one of the questions is, how do we make money? And part of that is brand partnerships. And I think it's really interesting what brands want from us. You know, they don't want ads. They don't want like a more conventional style of advertising. What they've wanted is collaborating with us from an editorial standpoint. So this is 2 examples of 2 collaborations that we've done with brands. Culture Clash was with Red Bull, And then the beauty of quitting was with Jones, a company that helps you quit vaping. And what they wanted was they teamed up with us to create little zines that are free, and we put all over New York City that people can just like interact with and take home. And it's essentially taking something that they already have. So Culture Clash is a festival that Red Bull does every year with different cultural parades. And then Quit with Jones is a brand that's all about quitting. But what we did is commission essays, commission artwork that has to do with Culture Clash and quitting, and turned it into this fun editorial zine, which basically creates like this elevated editorial product that brands get to say is theirs. And I think that's an uplifting thing, because I think, we don't always know how print is going to make money, especially indie print, but I think this is an example showing that brands value editorial content, and brands want to invest in places that are going to kind of editorialize their brand in a way that they never would be able to on their own. And that's it. Please pre-order Byline's upcoming issue. You can do it on byline.com, and that's my Instagram handle, and that's Byline's Instagram handle.
I think one of the things that has really struck me looking at your work and looking at how really now the website is, and it's quite different. You have a web designer.
Yes.
How do you and he work to take your ideas and actually code them up and make them happen?
One of the most important things, I think, creating a website that you want to feel special and custom is your developer. If you can't code yourself, which I am not at all, I have like working knowledge, but barely. He's actually a Canadian. He is a college student. I don't know how we found him, if I'm being honest. The founders found him, but honestly, what we would do is he loves challenges, and I would create whatever I wanted to do in like Illustrator or InDesign, like essentially like a screenshot of the web page, send it to him and be like, how close can we get to this? And usually the answer is pretty close. Sometimes obviously there's like a lot of back and forth of me having to look and being like, adjust the leading here, like make this type smaller, because obviously like what I envision in Illustrator for a web page is always not going to translate to a web, especially with like varying screen sizes, like other glitches that we can't anticipate. But I think it's just finding a developer who likes the idea of like editorialized web design too, because I think he also is such a large suggester of ideas, and a lot of the ideas like the pencil and eraser was like his idea. And I think like that's what I'm most thankful for, is someone that not just obviously has like the skill to emulate a web page that I design in like a non-web platform, but also has like the excitement to see like how we can push web design and make it playful.
A follow-up to that is your website accessible, and could it be, given how fancy it is and how much it moves around?
So the biggest thing that that the developers / the founders get on me about is the colors. Like, we run every single color combination through an accessibility test, and usually like my initial color combos, like half of them fail, and then I have to go back and like redo them. I think some of the stuff is a little crazy, like, like the shifting letters and like the different like color combinations. Overall though, we always keep like the gray and the black like color combination, which is like pretty like the most like pared down version. That's always available in every single theme. So like you can click through the colors, but if you want to stay in that mode, you can. But I do think it is a little fancy, and I do think that's one of the things that like I think as a designer, you always want to go like really out there and get crazy. And I do think like a good web developer will reel you back in and be like, that's not accessible, we need to reevaluate.
There's a website out of the US called the Food Section. I don't know if you've heard of it. They're kind of an intersectional magazine about food and everything else. But they just launched an accessible version of their Monday newsletter. So I thought I hadn't seen that before, and I thought, what a tremendous idea. So check it out, the Monday edition of the Food Section newsletter. I have a question here.
I was just curious, your inspiration, what do you do in your free time to inspire you? Like, what drives this?
I love magazines more than anything in this world, I think. But I think it's just the ability to like look at like other magazines that inspire me, and like just I want to create even if it's not that great. And I think it can be tough sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, like Bloomberg Businessweek 9 to 5, Byline 5 to 9, and then like other freelance stuff also. But I do think with Byline, that's what's exciting, and it can be like it can be a negative too, is that we don't have as much budget as like a large, like the New York Times or Bloomberg Businessweek, but I think that to me is like, what can I make something that's like almost 100% mine, and like I can look at it and it's like what I want, and the founders give me so much trust. Like every single print issue we've done is essentially like me doing it, giving it to them, and they might have a few, accessibility questions or like image selection questions, but pretty much it's all me, and I think there's something exciting about that. For quite literally inspiration, I think Pinterest is a great tool. Do you guys know what Arena is? REARE.NA. It's kind of like the designer's Pinterest. I highly suggest you guys check it out. There's like 1 million boards, and it's like the best design archive of thing I've ever seen. And then I think also just going to places in person. Like there's so many great magazine shops in New York that I like find myself there a lot. Museums, I think, is inspiring. And then also having a good creative circle is great. Like there's so many talented designers that I follow, and like I think not only does it inspire me, I think it also like pushes me to like continue my own personal creative practice, because I also want to be someone that like hopefully one day people will look at and also be inspired by, or like want to create something too.
I want to go back to the brand partnerships
Sure.
for a sec. And I know that you can't really talk about the ad edit, that kind of thing, but maybe you could talk a bit about how you navigate integrating Jones or Urban Outfitters into your design without feeling like I'm making an ad.
Totally. The good part about these brand partnerships, I think, because they want it to be like Byline and then in smaller letters like our brand, they let us have a lot of creative control when it comes to commissioning photography, commissioning illustration, and the editorial design itself. So for example, this zine, we did all the creative photography our own. Like we hired the photographer, I was on set, like no people from the brand were on set. I commissioned all the illustrations. So I think they appreciate us taking it like it's our own project, because I think it makes them feel good to be like supporting indie print, but I also think they get like a product that feels, almost like it's essentially they're getting like an editorialized version of their brand that they would not be able to create on their own. There is some pushback from brands sometimes, and like for example, for the Urban Outfitters one, they were really open to all my branding, but there were some like innate restrictions. For example, all the clothing that everyone was wearing in the stories that they were like specifically paying for, they had to be wearing Dickies and or Urban Outfitters clothing. So I think there's like restrictions on that, like styling restrictions. For this zine in particular, one of the problems I ran into was we had to kind of redo a lot of the illustrations, because this is a brand that is selling a nicotine product, because it is about quitting vaping, so they have these mints that do have nicotine in them. And the illustrations were so playful, it was kind of a discussion back and forth about like, we love the playfulness, we love the brightness, it can't feel like it's for kids. So I think like stuff like that will come up, but overall I think they're really excited to work with us, and I think they're excited to work with small brands, and they hire us for our vision. And I've been lucky with that so far.
Yeah. I love the color in your design, and every brand is different, of course, but the color in your design gives me such joy. Maybe it's the dopamine hit, right, of all of that.
Just curious about your website platform, your design platform. Is it totally custom?
So it's called Strappy, which is it's essentially a website where you can update content. But yeah, one of the things our developer was also great at was like research of what's out there, because when we were first starting the website, and like Man Repeller, for example, Domino Magazine, for example, those were two really large professional brands that I worked at. They used WordPress. So like, because it's hard for an editorial website that you're updating constantly, you either need to have like your totally own like uploading system, like the New York Times and Bloomberg Businessweek, they both have like totally custom coding platforms, because like the whole name of the game is like being able to upload stories. So he found this website called Strappy, which is like a way that you can upload content pretty regularly, but it's also really customizable. The website is 100% custom, and he even had to customize like different fields for us to like upload stories. For example, every single story we have on the web, we put like a custom color combo on, or would like have to change the color combos every single issue. He had to make like a whole field for us to be able to enter that. But yes, it's totally custom, except for our Shopify, because it's harder to customize Shopify. But we did the best we could with it.